Good morning, everyone. Would you like to settle down so we can get the first plenary session of this morning underway? Hello? Could we either take the conversations outside the room or defer them, please? We would like to start. Thank you. I'm Shashi Tharoor, and I'm here to moderate a panel with the intriguing title, Connecting a Continent and Asian Union. We have a very distinguished panel. Their biographies are all in the conference booklet, which I'm sure you all have, so I will not repeat them. The format is very simple. We're going to have brief 4 to 5 minute remarks by each of the panelists. They may speak from their seats or from the podium as they wish. And we will then have an exchange amongst us, which we will, of course, open up to the audience as well. We'll try and finish punctually at 12. In talking about connecting a continent, I was struck by the fact that, of course, world affairs are no longer, if they ever were meaningfully, about nation states autonomously pursuing their national interests. Today, it's very much more a world of interdependence, of regional, sub-regional, and transnational cooperation across boundaries. And Asia, in many ways, sticks out as a sore thumb for having made the least progress in connecting with each other across the continental divides. Certainly, South Asia has been described by the World Bank as the world's least integrated region, or sub-region if you wish. Just 5% of South Asia's trade is within the SAARC region, and a region with 22% of the world's population, as a result perhaps, produces only 6% of its GDP. Further trade integration within South Asian economies could easily yield a couple of $1 billion to consumers, but political and logistical obstacles have prevented that. It's very clear that a strong political ties can lead to stronger economic ties as well as vice versa. And with the current global economic slowdown, it's all the more important to look to Asia to be the engine for economic development and growth, which will need, of course, more mutual support and respect. I mean, it's striking that if you look at just India's exports, for example, 13.4% of all our exports go to the US, and just 4.2% go to China. So very clearly, we are far from acting east, as our Prime Minister has often said it. But India actually is an interesting perspective from which to look at Asian connections, because you could essentially look at 4 significant Asian sub-regions: West Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and Southeast and East Asia. And if you were to look at the continent in that way, and from an Indian perspective, and that's where I sit as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Indian Parliament, West Asia, our connections are almost entirely centered around 2 things: labor, Indian migrant labor in the Gulf countries in particular is close to 6 million people now, and oil. It's a vital source of oil and gas for India. Otherwise, regular connectivity is much more modest. Central Asia, the potential is huge, but connectivity is obviously limited thanks to the perhaps insuperable barrier of hostility with Pakistan, which lies between us and Central Asia, as well as, of course, the unfulfilled potential of Afghanistan, given its own enormous civil traumas. That leaves us with South Asia itself, which I have described to you, and East and Southeast Asia. And I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about the latter, because our Look East policy was enunciated in the early 90s. It was not merely a matter of external policy, but a strategic shift in India's vision of the world and of India's place in the evolving global economy. And it was about reaching out to civilizational neighbors in the region and availing of the economic opportunities presented by these countries. And the realization that greater economic integration with Southeast and East Asia was, of course, the key to all of this. These are countries with which trade links had flourished millennia ago, and that would make them natural trading partners. But politics and the Cold War and various divisions through the 50s and 60s had prevented this from becoming a reality for quite some time. Today, the launch of the Look East policy in the early 90s has now been intensified with the announcement of an Act East policy by the present government during the India-ASEAN summit in November 2014. And this has meant that there's a renewed emphasis on connectivity, at least eastward, whereas, as I mentioned earlier with West Asia, some of the connections need to be built upon, and that too appears to be beginning to be taken very seriously. The India-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement on Goods, adopted in August 2009, in the face, by the way, of critical domestic opposition from farmers in India, is perhaps the most striking evidence of the strategic priority afforded by the Indian government of the day to commercial relations with East Asia and Southeast Asia. And then there are, of course, a slew of bilateral agreements signed with individual countries, FTAs and comprehensive economic agreements with a lot of East Asian, Southeast Asian countries. Japan has become a significant player in this as well, with its cumulative FDI in India accounting for almost $16 billion from 2000 to 2015. At the same time, there is no question that it's not enough to look at these individual economic developments. They are undergirded by the absence of political problems, but and the end of the extraneous factors, shall we say, that prevented better relations with ASEAN. But at the same time, the strategic partnership with ASEAN still has to be mirrored in a number of concrete and positive developments that would involve the boosting of trade, the deepening of investments, the establishment of a genuine free trade area, and indeed much, much more tourism than we actually see today. It's striking that in the last couple of years we've seen a decrease in total trade between ASEAN and India, and that worries me because obviously the trend was expected to be steadily in the other direction. Part of the lessons we in India need to learn is that it's all very well for us to look east and act east, but that needs to be reciprocated from East Asia and Southeast Asia by those countries looking and acting west towards India as well. And that again is a progress that we need to make. There are other interesting examples of sub-regional cooperation. There's the Indian Ocean Rim Association, EORA. There's BIMSTEC, which ties together a number of countries of both South and Southeast Asia, and the Mekong-Ganga Cooperation Organization. But I think it would be disingenuous to imply that any of these have come close to fulfilling their huge potential, and they certainly lag behind comparable organizations in other parts of the world, in Latin America and Europe particularly. I'll end by simply saying that we in Asia are all countries that are very proud of our sovereignty. We have tended to celebrate with great fierceness our independence days. But it's time we across Asia realized, it seems to me, that every other day in the calendar right across Asia is really an interdependence day. Thank you very much, and I now turn to the panel, and I'll start with the first and youngest speaker sitting closest to me, Peter Tan, Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore. As you wish. You also have a, you can speak from the podium or from the mic on your lapel, as you wish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. His Excellency Sir James, former President of Seychelles, Director Joshi, as well as His Excellency Shashi Tharoor. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here this morning. I would very much like to thank the organizer for inviting Singapore to participate in this inaugural Raisina Dialogue. I've been asked to talk about ASEAN integration, probably because among the panel today, I'm the only one from the ASEAN country. First of all, let me say that ASEAN has come, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has come a long way, but it is still very much a work in progress. When we talk about the ASEAN integration, we look back when we first came about in 1967. Its fundamental purpose was to bring stability to a region beset by conflict. And leaders of the founding ASEAN knew that if they did not hang together, they would hang separately. In ASEAN, it comprises Sovereign states at various stages of economic development with different histories, language, political systems, and culture. But it is this very diversity and sovereignty meant that ASEAN had to operate by consensus. And in ASEAN, we have regular meetings, build trust and confidence among ASEAN member states. And over time, this developed habits of mutual dialogue, consultations, and consensus building. As we have all heard yesterday, it is all about coming together with a common vision, common purpose, and with much cooperation. And through all this process of consultations and meetings, ASEAN members have therefore come together to forge a common vision for peace and shared prosperity. And if I may just raise an example, the fruit of our labor over the nearly past 5 decades, has been the establishment of the ASEAN community last year. And this is a major pillar of this milestone was the ASEAN Economic Community. And this ASEAN Economic Community seeks to transform ASEAN into a regional competitive single market and production base with freer flow of goods, services, and skilled labor, supported by air, land, and maritime connectivity. And today, ASEAN combined has more than 600 million people with a GDP of about US 2.6 billion and the 7th largest economy in the world. And significantly, this economic community promised to be the most tangible difference for the people of ASEAN member countries. Young people will have the opportunities to succeed, and the small, medium enterprises can expand their operations to the wider region and to serve ASEAN's growing middle class. And this, in turn, will foster greater public understanding and support. And the vision and the reach of the dynamic ASEAN extends further afield. For example, ASEAN-led platforms such as the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Plus 3, the ASEAN Regional Forum are indispensable mechanisms for greater dialogue and cooperation. And major powers and key stakeholders are willing to engage at these forums and support ASEAN in centrality because ASEAN is not threatening, and it maintains good relations with all and presents a neutral platform. Looking ahead, ASEAN stands to grow together with Asia, with India and China's economic health, as well as ASEAN making steady progress. There is great potential for joint prosperity and success. But given the geopolitical uncertainty and global economic outlook with the challenges that we all face, deepening integration has become even more vital in ensuring peace and security in the region. In this regard, ASEAN's dialogue partner plays a critical role in deepening regional cooperation. For example, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership involves 16 parties who will strengthen relations between ASEAN and all the 6 ASEAN's FTA partners. And the main dialogue partners have also been actively supporting ASEAN's connectivity efforts such as the Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity and various transport agreements with ASEAN. And when you look at all the processes that we have within the ASEAN region, the question for today really is, what can India do? If you look around the region, in our part of the world, India is very much a part of our family through its membership in the ARF, as well as our dialogue partner. And it has an important role to play in shaping an open, balanced, and inclusive regional architecture. We therefore welcome India's Act East policy, as India is an influential and important player in the regional architecture. Many countries recognize India's growth potential. Similarly, ASEAN looks forward to enhancing our economic linkages with India. Land connectivity projects with India are also making good headway, and air connectivity should also be at the forefront. While roads and railways still need to be built, airports across India and ASEAN are already there. All it takes is greater liberalization of air traffic rights to see immediate economic benefits for India and ASEAN. In this regard, we are encouraged by Prime Minister Modi's government in reviewing its aviation policy, and we are hopeful that this will catalyze progress on the ASEAN-India Air Transport Agreement to generate more inter-regional travel between ASEAN and India, further increase business interactions, and contribute to enhancing regional integration. To conclude, I think the ASEAN-led mechanisms have been useful in bringing peace and prosperity to the region, and certainly India has an important part to play. Let me once again thank our host for giving me the opportunity to speak to a crowd today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter Tan. There are questions that come to mind, but we'll save that for after the thing. I want to urge the remaining speakers to please scrupulously respect the 5-minute maximum, or we won't have time for a discussion. Helga Zepp, I know you're going to be, as you're there or here, as you wish, to speak on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and the nature of the new Asian Union. You have the floor, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers of this very distinguished forum to give me the opportunity to speak, because I think most people know that mankind is in one of its most severe crises, and maybe the most important crisis in all of our history. The strategic situation is described by many analysts as more dangerous as during the height of the Cold War, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The transatlantic financial system is headed for a new crisis worse than 2008, and the refugee crisis in Europe is really not only a tremendous humanitarian crisis, but it is about to explode the EU. Now the question is, are we as a human civilization capable of changing wrong policies which have led to this crisis, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes which have led, due to geopolitics, to 2 world wars in the 20th century? But fortunately, we are also witnessing the emergence of a completely new paradigm. Under the leadership of the BRICS countries, a completely new set of relations among states is developing based on mutual interest, economic cooperation, and collaboration in future-oriented high-technology areas, such as thermonuclear fusion, the research into space, and therefore a deeper understanding of the physical principles of our universe. The Chinese New Silk Road program, One Belt, One Road, is offering the Chinese economic miracle to be repeated in every country which wants to cooperate in this win-win perspective. Already 65 states are participating in this new model of cooperation, and it is in the process of overcoming geopolitics and with that the source of war, potentially forever. The new agreement between US Secretary of State Kerry and the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov concerning a ceasefire for Syria is potentially a game changer for the entire strategic situation, provided that especially Russia, China, and India immediately work with the countries of Southwest Asia to implement a comprehensive build-up program, not only for the war-torn countries, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, but for the entire region, from Afghanistan to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Persian Gulf. And with the trip of President Xi Jinping to the region, to Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, the extension of the Silk Road is now on the table. The Schiller Institute published a 370-page study with the title, "The New Silk Road is Becoming the World Land Bridge," which is already available in Chinese, in Arabic, and soon in Korean language, which is a blueprint for a comprehensive build-up of the whole world economy. It contains a very concrete plan for Southwest Asia. So this region, between Asia, Europe, and Africa, has a huge development potential with great human and natural sources, and it is uniquely located. The 5C strategy announced in 2004 by President Assad can still be a reference point for an infrastructure net between the Mediterranean Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Caspian Sea, and the Black Sea, making this region potentially a prosperous hub for the vast increases of trade between Asia, Europe, and Africa. Two major development corridors, one east-west and another one north-south, will not only include integrated fast train systems, highways, pipelines, water projects, industries, and agriculture. With modern technologies such as nuclear energy for the desalination of vast amounts of ocean water and the ionization of moisture in the atmosphere, we can green the desert and reconquer large areas of the desert for agriculture and human habitation. The new Silk Road, which already extends from Chongqing and Yiwu to Tehran, where the first Silk Road train arrived 3 weeks ago, can be extended from there via Baghdad, Amman, Aqaba, and then continues through a tunnel to Sharm el-Sheikh in the southern Sinai to Cairo. The route crosses the Euphrates River, where ancient travel routes can be transformed into modern corridors from the Basra port in Iraq at the Persian Gulf northwest to Aleppo. Existing railroads along the Euphrates in Iraq and a railroad between Aleppo in Syria and Deir el-Sur on the Euphrates should be modernized, and a new line from there to Baghdad connecting the main arteries of the Silk Road should be built. Again, this corridor should not just be rail, but integrate transport, energy production, distribution, communication, and create the conditions governing location for the development of industry and new cities. A land route to India connecting the Iranian rail network up to Sahedan on the Iran-Pakistan border is on schedule to be completed. Other lines, for time reasons very briefly, from Deir ez-Zor to Tadmor Palmyra to Damascus and Beirut, a north-south link from Syria to the industrial zones of the Suez Canal, a north-south railway from Damascus to Mecca and Medina, a tunnel under the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to Djibouti, to the Arab Peninsula, and links to Europe, the Black Sea, and Russia. India has good relations with practically all the countries of the region and has been asked already by Russia and China to play a mediating role in such a developing perspective. As Prime Minister Modi said, 65% of the Indian population is under 35 years of age, and that is the greatest asset of the country. These youth must be not only given a vision to help to increase the productivity of the Indian agriculture through the use of power, water, fertilizer, high variety seeds, and so forth, so that the number of working people as farmers can be halved and that land be used for a build-up of infrastructure. But the youth of India can also be inspired to take it as their own mission to participate in the economic transformation of Southwest Asia and Africa, and in this way be part of creating a future for all of mankind. The realization of such a development, the last sentence, the realization of such a development perspective is the only way how to end the refugee crisis and revive the economies of Europe and the United States and to develop all of Asia.
Thank you, Ms. Zepp. Thank you very much. Should have mentioned that Helga Zepp is the head of the Schiller Institute in Germany. I apologize for the interruptions. I will have to do it again because I'm getting signals from the organizers we're running over time. Our next speaker is from the private sector. Mr. Ding Guorong is the Executive Vice President of the Silk Road Fund in Beijing. Mr.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to visit India, an ancient civilization in history and a vital modern emerging market and the developing countries. And I'm glad to discuss with you here how to enhance connectivity across Asia. I would like to talk about the roles of Silk Road Fund can play in boosting China-India investment cooperation, from prospects for bilateral trade and economic cooperation between China and India. Since the breakout of the global financial crisis, cooperation has been a theme at international economic forums. China and India, the two largest developing countries, have strong potential for deepening cooperation. China's customs statistics show that bilateral trade between China and India grew 23-fold from 2000 to 2014, and China has become India's largest trade partner. India was China's #1 overseas engineering contracting market between 2006 and 2011. The bilateral direct investment between the two countries also have sustained rapid growth, with China's investments in India reaching $1.184 billion as at the end of 2014, and $564 million vice versa. The two countries' industries are complementary in many areas. India is competitive in agricultural, mineral, and pharmaceutical products, IT, jewelry, and textiles, while China is experienced in infrastructure constructions and manufacturing development with relatively abundant funds. China and India have great potential and broad room to cooperate in production capacity and infrastructure. During President Xi Jinping's visit to India last September, leaders of both countries drew up a roadmap for deepening and balancing economic ties between the two countries, decided on building auto and power equipment industrial parks, and carrying out strategic cooperation in railways, and proposed the targets of pushing bilateral trade volumes up to $100 billion and increasing China's investments in India to $20 billion in 5 years. I learned from media that during the Make in India week in Mumbai 2 weeks ago, many Chinese enterprises expressed their willingness and plans to invest in ME equipment, automobiles, and industrial parks in India. These Chinese financial institutions can provide funding and financial services for cooperation between the two countries, and the Silk Road Fund is expecting to play an active role. Now I would like to take this opportunity to brief you on the Silk Road Fund. On November 8, 2014, President Xi Jinping announced at the Dialogue on Strengthening Connectivity Partnership that China would contribute $40 billion to establish the Silk Road Fund. At the end of December 2014, the Silk Road Fund was officially incorporated in Beijing, with investment from the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, China Investment Corporation, Export and Import Bank of China, and the China Development Bank. As a medium to long-term development and investment fund, the Silk Road Fund is committed to providing investment and financing support for countries and regions along the Belt and the Road to carry out infrastructure, resource development, industrial cooperation, and financial cooperation through a variety of market-oriented approaches, mainly medium to long-term equity investments. However, the fund's investments are not confined to the areas along the Belt and the Road. Following the principles of connectivity, economic return, cooperation, and openness, the Silk Road Fund first makes sure its outbound investment is aligned with the development strategy and the planning of the recipient countries, and then makes investments in mutually beneficial projects based on market principles, international practice, and professional standards, so as to achieve reasonable returns on investments in the medium to long term. The fund can conduct various forms of investments and financing cooperation with domestic and international enterprises and the financial institutions.
Could you wrap up?
Including the World Bank. Okay.
If you could conclude.
In more than 1 year's practice, the fund explores mainly in investments, financing vehicles, and the investments in infrastructure and industrial cooperation projects. Mainly, we use the three forms of investments. The major one is the equity and the debt form. The second one is we can invest in the preferential shares or the IPO to indirectly support Chinese enterprise, the overseas investment corporation. And the last one is we can invest as the fund of fund in a subsidiary level to promote the cooperation in the economics level. So we have established the China-Kazakhstan Production Capacity Cooperation Fund. And going forward, the Silk Road Fund will continue to explore investment opportunities. We are looking forward to cooperating with Indian enterprises and the financial institutions to jointly promote the trade and economic development in both countries and contribute to a more balanced, sustainable, and robust economic growth in both countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ding. I'd like to turn now to Mr. Hideaki Domichi. He's Senior Vice President of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the principal aid agency of the government of Japan. Mr. Domichi.
Thank you. JICA is Japan International Cooperation Agency. I would like to give you an idea, what we are trying to do relating to this agenda today, connecting a continent and Asian Union. The connectivity project which JICA is engaged with in India are flagship projects that are designed to build industrial corridors between Delhi and Mumbai and Chennai and Bangalore. The backbone of the DMIC is the building of the dedicated freight corridor that can transport the bulk of containers from the ports in Maharashtra or in Gujarat to Delhi within 1 day instead of present 3 days. DFC is scheduled to start running by the end of 2019. Along the route of DFC, industrial parks are to be built together with residential areas which could become smart cities. DMIC, a development corporation, is already coordinating with each state to select priority projects such as railways, water, airport, power plants, logistic bases, housing, and commercial facilities. The government of India and Japan agreed already on a list of prospective 19 projects which could be eligible for co-financing by both Japan and India, worth $9 billion. 7 projects were defined as candidate projects for JICA assisting. The industrial corridors are to promote manufacturing sector in India or make in India, which is very important also in terms of addressing employment issues of growing young population. And to build smart cities will change the lifestyle of the people. In the Chennai-Bangalore Industrial Corridor, development clusters in 3 states, that is Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka, have been selected in JICA's master plan that would also include cooperation between Andhra Pradesh, Japan, and Singapore to build new capital in Andhra Pradesh. While DMIC runs through the states whose industrial production is already high in India, Chennai-Bangalore Industrial Corridor have the strength to be connected with ASEAN countries. In ASEAN countries, JICA is engaged with a similar connectivity project that will connect Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. In the northeastern states of India, we have begun studies to enhance connectivity in those states, including connectivity with the neighboring countries, Bangladesh and Myanmar. In parallel with the connectivity project in these northern eastern states of India, In Bangladesh, for instance, we have launched the initiative of the Bay of Bengal Industrial Growth Belt that is designed to build industrial zone with a deep sea port in Mutabari. The connectivity projects are one of the pillars of the JICA's cooperation in various parts of the world, not only in India, but in Southeast Asia and Africa. Connectivity projects, especially cross-border projects, will bring benefits of scale of economy, economic integration, and access especially for landlocked countries, but has to be supported by political interest for regional partnership. India is a subcontinent as big as Europe, except Russia. Therefore, our cooperation is currently focusing on the projects within India, but like northeastern states connectivity projects, we are seeking a synergy between India's Act East policy and Japan's Partnership for Quality Infrastructure. Japan will invest $110 billion in 5 years to promote infrastructure in Asia in cooperation with Asian Development Bank. Most important thing in such cooperation or promote this such cooperation is the vision. Our two governments, both India and Japan, share the visions in our special strategic and global partnership for 2025, committed and monitored every year by the prime ministers. They support the ambitious vision for accelerating inclusive growth in India by transforming the infrastructure and manufacturing sectors, and also to enhance connectivity in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omichi. That was kind of you to do it with such brisk punctuality. Our final speaker on this panel, Mr. Hung-mao Tian, President of the Institute for National Policy Research in Taiwan. Mr. Hung-mao Tian.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our host for inviting me to be in India for the first time, and to congratulate India's Ministry of External Affairs for undertaking such a very important step in organizing another international forum. The time limited is the main concern, so I would simply like to take this opportunity to offer you my brief overview of the existing regional networking in East Asia, and secondly, to share with you many scholars' point of view with regard to the main issues in contention. I hope this will be useful for you as an organizer to serve as a reference in organizing the content for the future. Although many regional institutions have come into existence in East Asia in recent years, their ability to provide a cohesive governance structure for the region is limited by mutual distrust among the member states. Numerous layers of regional economic and multi-purpose architectures, such as the following. I'll single out quite briefly. The ASEAN Regional Forum, APEC, ASEAN Plus 6 or plus 8. East Asian Summit, Asia Development Bank, and most recently initiated by China, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the forthcoming, perhaps, the TPP, and even RCEP. These simply are some of the samples of the existing regional institutional structure designed for promotion of cross-border trade, investment, as well as resolving the outstanding issues in economic as well as in security areas. But there are debates as regard to what kind of approach will be most appropriate. Let me outline some of the major contentious issues. Number one, there is a disagreement as to whether or not regional organizations should be open or cross-forum in carrying out regionalism. And second, there is a view about whether those meetings or gatherings should serve as a dialogue for confidence building, problem solving, and practical form of cooperation. Number three, what will be the relationship between multilateralism and bilateralism, and the extent to which bilateralism reinforces or distracts from the likely success of multilateralism. Number four, in actual practice, nation-state remains autonomous actor in seeking solution for many economic and territorial conflicts. Number five, this regional organization will not reach full potential in governance, integrated community, in the absence of the higher level of trust among participants. Despite widespread effect of economic and technological globalization as cross-border flows of capitals, goods, and human laborers expand, persistent practice of various forms of state capitalism and protectionism tend to undermine multilateral paths toward union formation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that in the final analysis, the ultimate vision of an Asian Union could be built only on the foundation of successful open forms of multilateralism, such as APEC, TPP, or RCEP, which would make room for countries like India, geographically, not in the center of this region, and perhaps for my country, the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, for active participation. I thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for your brevity. We are, in fact, perilously close to 12 noon. Since our panel began late, I'm assuming we can go on a bit late. I'll wait for the organizers to disabuse me. But perhaps one question I can ask everybody before I open it to the audience, and I'll start with Peter since he was the first speaker, is the ASEAN model replicable anywhere else in Asia, let alone across Asia? Or does it stand out as an exception for its own success? Peter, you might want to start with that. And while the others are considering their responses, I will ask members of the audience. Is someone going around with a mic for the audience? Hello? Nobody from the organizers here? There are mics at the back? They have to, okay, then you have to, sorry, on the side, on the two sides. So those who wish to ask questions will please have to walk to the mics on the sides, and while you're walking, could the panel respond to this question? Is the ASEAN model replicable? Peter.
Thank you very much for the question.
Mics.
I think as you have said in your remarks, that the theme today, or this session on the connecting the continent and Asian Union is indeed very intriguing. As I've mentioned, ASEAN has come a long way, but it's still very much a work in progress, and we do not pretend to be a model for any union or any communities. But in any such collaboration and cooperation among member countries in any region, it is always important to remember that what we need is a common vision and a common purpose, as we have heard so quite often yesterday. And with that, I think I've explained in my opening remarks on the path that ASEAN has gone through over the past nearly 5 decades, and it takes a lot for a region with different countries, different culture, different political system, different history, different languages, to come together to really have to synergize and harmonize everything together, maximizing the strength of each and member country and minimizing misunderstanding through cooperation. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to chip in on that? Helga?
Yes, as I said, we are at a crossroad in human history, and while the sovereignty of the nation state will remain important, I think we have to make the shift to the common aims of mankind as the first priority. Because if we remain in the area of geopolitical conflict, of just ways as they were before, I think we will not make it as a species. But I think if we adopt a common vision to solve the problems of mankind which are uniting us, such as world hunger, terrorism, the question of making our planet safe, then I think all these regional alliances will be combined through a common mission, and then they have a great future and they can work.
Interesting. Anybody else would like to chip in? Yes, Mr. Lee, go ahead.
I just try to add something. In the last remarks of Mr. Chen, he just mentioned the ROC. I think it's inappropriate here. It's challenged the basic policy of Indian government, that is the One China policy. So I just express my regret.
Right. No, I think
as the ASEAN, I think it's a very good example to enhance the cooperation and exchange of views and economic ties. Truly, it will enhance the development of the local society. Thank you.
Understood. In fact, I think you have excellent economic ties across the straits, with lots of investment from Taiwan and China and vice versa. Yes, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, about your questions, I don't think that EU model is replicable in Asia for various reasons. We are talking a lot about about Asian architecture for the future, and in my opinion, it is very, very important to keep ASEAN in driving seat, and also to invite India to play more positive role. What we keep an eye on for the future development is 2 things. One is about the TPP, Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership,
Yes.
and how will this change the picture in this region. Second one is the status of renminbi. Chinese government is trying to promulgate the renminbi as the international currency, and probably in the One Belt, One Road policy, they would like to the renminbi to have more use in the various regions of this region. Therefore, this may change the picture for the future. 2 things.
Interesting. The renminbi, of course, at the moment is not used anywhere really other than in China, but you're right, with the strength of the Chinese economy, the future could be different. Would you like to add a final word, Mr. Hung-mao, here? No. All right, I see lots of people lined up at the mics. We start with you, sir. You first, you second, you third, and come back. Go ahead.
My question is to Mr. Peter
And then
Tan.
the time will be over.
My question is to Mr. Peter Tan. would you agree with the view that ASEAN at the moment is facing a midlife crisis and also faces the danger of losing its centrality unless it reinvents itself by uniting amongst the ASEAN in the face of China's deliberate attempt to divide the ASEAN, particularly on the question of South China Sea? Thank you.
I think the question was targeted
Yes,
at you,
sure.
Mr. Tan. Go ahead.
So you will take individually?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank
Short
you for
question,
the
short
question.
answers. Best
Yes.
form.
Well, short question, short answer.
Unless the organizers here
Let
to
me say
advise
that
you.
at nearly 50, you're certainly right to describe it as a midlife crisis, but as in all midlife crises, we will emerge out a better person or even a better organization. I think ASEAN centrality is really not a question. It's not really in question, but really how, as you said, remake ourselves. And last year was a milestone that we have established the ASEAN community, and the important part of it was the ASEAN Economic Community. And this is, in a way, we are trying to, in your words, remake ourselves. I personally do not see, as what you've described, China trying to divide ASEAN. I think as in all our partners, our partnership, our dialogue, relationship with our dialogue partners, is the case of working with all our dialogue partners, in so much as even with India. And as I've mentioned, ASEAN centrality is always there because as a group, ASEAN is not threatening. And we can bring people together, including our dialogue partners, to work together and cooperate.
Okay, thank you very much. I will turn to you. I'm sorry about the two people at the back. We've been instructed by the organizers. There's only time for one more question. I think the conference has been running a bit late since we started only 11:15. My apologies. So you get the last question.
Thank you. My question actually is to the panel as a whole. The connectivity orientation that you see, one set is North-South, that is China radiating out of China, and the other one is East-West. Would you like to comment as to why the East-West orientation of the connective development, why is it so slow as compared to North-South? Thank you.
East-West versus North-South. Shall we start with you, Mr. Hung-mao, and move this way?
I really have
No additional comment. What about you, Mr. Domichi?
Yeah, maybe
Passing the buck.
Start.
All right, Mr. Ding, do you have any thoughts? East-West versus North-South in connectivity.
I'm not a politician.
Not a politician. Helga.
Well, when China proposed the new Silk Road, One Belt, One Road policy in the first time, there was a lot of discussion about, should the North-South to Russia or should it be East-West? And, we have taken the attitude that once you have a vision how the world should look like in 100 years from now, all of these corridors will be built because we are now at the verge where, the evolution of the human species, where, I don't want to make it too long, but life developed out of the oceans to the planet, to the earth, through photosynthesis. Then
That's getting a bit longer. You go back to photosynthesis.
Man developed at a certain point. We started to build infrastructure from the ports, from the oceans. We developed railroads. And now, with the Silk Road policy, we have reached, in the first time in human history, a point where we can develop all the landlocked areas of all continents. So I think people should be patient, and see that there is no contradiction between North-South and East-West, because eventually it will be an integrated program which will uplift the landlocked areas of every continent and upgrade the productivity of all people. So if we have this joint vision to overcome all of these problems, I think this contradiction will disappear.
Interesting thought. Peter, do you want to have a word on this?
No, just to say that I agree with our panelists from Germany. I think we should not see it as a contradiction.
Yeah.
But really, it's about connectivity, connection, and connectivity today is not just about physical connection. I think it is a broader definition of that.
Since unlike the rest of you, I am a politician, let me say that I would agree that we need both East-West and North-South, and greater integration is clearly the way to go in a more and more interdependent and globalizing world. But then the question of the geopolitics of that integration cannot be ignored. That is If the integration boils down to domination by a particular country or a particular source of economic strength, that could be a matter of concern for other countries along the route. But if it is a much more co-equal, cooperative relationship with individual units having, shall we say, an equal stake and equal outcomes and equal possibilities of determining those outcomes, then certainly this would be a laudable objective. But we have to, I think, recognize that whereas there is a great deal of enthusiasm in many quarters for the One Belt, One Road idea, and the Silk Route goes back centuries, the history of the Silk Route had some problems. It did involve, in some cases, regime change. It did involve certain actions along the way, which have had unseated regimes in Bali, in Sumatra, in Kandy, in Sri Lanka. And that's 600-year-old history or 500-year-old history, but the fact is these are things we cannot entirely ignore when we look at these ostensibly benign objectives of trade and economic cooperation. So let me say, speaking as a politician, we welcome more cooperation, more integration, but with our eyes wide open. On that note, I'm afraid the organizers are standing up already, so I thank you all for your patient hearing, and thank you to the panelists. Please give them a hand for their excellent contribution.